You know, that always happens. Okay, so we are recording. We are going to let folks in. I have too many screens open too. Oh my God. Okay, admit all. We're live. Hi, everyone. Oh, I'll let you connect your sound. Thanks everyone for joining tonight. We're gonna get started in just 1 minute. So in the meantime, if you just get warm, get comfy, get your tea, and we'll get started soon. We'll go through some housekeeping and we'll dive right in. And so for those of you just joining us, we're gonna get started, I guess, right now. Tonight, because it's 6 o'clock and I like to be prompt, tonight my goal is to speak slowly. I know people had trouble with my connection last week, so if you do notice that I'm speaking fast, they've added this new little icon in the participant column if you've upgraded Zoom, where you can tell me to go slower. So please feel free to do that, and we'll pay attention to that. So tonight we are talking about digital marketing and engagement, your fairs and events best practice playbook. And so we have Vanessa with us from Halmyre, and she's going to do she's put together a really good presentation for us. But before that, let's do what we always do, the housekeeping, which I'm sure most of you are already familiar with. First and foremost, we do ask that you turn off your video and put your line on mute. We will mute you ourselves if we notice there's background noise, just to make sure that the presenter can be heard clearly. The conversation is being recorded. We'll have it available online. Usually we get it up tomorrow morning, so you can catch up that way. But that being said, if you don't wish to be recorded, please remove yourself from the call, or you can just sit back quietly and listen. That's all right too. We also ask for questions. Feel free to enter them into the group chat as they're coming up, and I'll announce them at the end. Vanessa and I will have a Q&A session, or at the end, you can bring up your questions too. You can also raise your hand to ask questions. Et finalement, toujours, comme vous savez, si vous avez des questions en français, nous sommes ici. Moi, je peux faire la traduction et on va voir les réponses. I'll practice. Alrighty. So, with Vanessa, she has a background spanning retail, e-commerce, 360 event management, partnership planning, experiential marketing, and data-driven social media strategy. She has the expertise not only to deliver an insightful deep dive into your business performance, but also fresh, forward-thinking solutions to overcome challenges. Always a bright and energetic force, her strong people service-oriented approach is best illustrated by her work with the University of Toronto, Live Nation, Under Armour, Ontario Medical Association, Nelson, and many others. After completing a BSc from the University of Guelph, Vanessa's last stop in the education circuit was with an MBA from McMaster's de Group, where she demonstrated her fearlessness in seeking out employment opportunities in Finland and further finance courses at EDHEC in France. She specializes in driving strategic business growth and stakeholder alignment through expert marketing that challenges clients to look beyond their limits and engage in insight-driven long-term planning and execution. So she is beyond qualified to talk to us tonight, and I think it's going to be a great conversation. On that note, Vanessa, I'm going to stop sharing, let you share your screen, and let you take over here.
Perfect, thank you. Just give me 1 second here to get my screen going.
No problemo.
There we go. Okay, I think we're all set. I see a little intruder here, so let me pop that out. There we go. We're all set. Perfect. Okay. So, Christina, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share some hopefully valuable knowledge around digital marketing and social media metrics. So thank you all for joining us this evening. I imagine most of us are still on some kind of quarantine. So I appreciate you taking the time out of these days that just kind of seem to flow aimlessly into one another. And I hope that I can provide you with some thought-provoking content as we go through this. So Christina's already given me a very flattering introduction, but just to give you a little bit of background on our current situation, I currently work for Halmyre, which is a consulting firm providing intelligent marketing solutions. Marketing is perhaps a little bit too narrow of a descriptor of what we do. Essentially, we partner with organizations to dive deeper into their strategic plans and see how we can spark growth. So in this case, we're going to be talking about how we can create a best practices playbook for digital marketing and engagement. So just a bit of an agenda for this evening. So first we're going to go through kind of the current climate and situation. Then we'll go right into that best practice playbook and kind of a 5-step overview as to how we can achieve that. And then we'll finish up with some resources and a time for questions at the end. So I want to get started here with just a quick poll. So I think I can do that here. I'm going to start that for you. So let me click that on. There we go, launch polling, we're in. There we go. So do you see increased or decreased opportunities for events and fairs ahead? Everybody can just weigh in with a yes, no, or unsure. That would be great. Okay, so let's give it a few more seconds here. Get those last couple in. I think we're stalled out at 39, so we'll leave it there. So, oh, we got to 40. So it seems that we're kind of on the fence. A lot of us are optimistic, but some of us are unsure. So hopefully we can kind of change your opinion surrounding that as we go through tonight. So let's pop through here to the next one. So let's talk a little bit about the situation that we find ourselves in. We're in a global pandemic. There's no question about it. The broader impact of COVID-19 on events can be traced back to March 12th, which is when the NBA abruptly suspended its season following the news that 2 players in the Utah Jazz had tested positive for COVID-19. That really sent shockwaves through the global sports and events circles. The consequences of the pandemic really became tangible at that point. Within days, every geography kind of reacted to their own cases and scenarios. And everything from high-profile competitions and events around the globe, from the English Premier League to Formula One, all started disappearing off of our calendars. When we think of closer to home, the catalog of events was either indefinitely postponed or canceled. World-renowned productions like the Calgary Stampede, who canceled certain events on March 13th, and then finally made the decision to cancel entirely on April 23rd, to more local events like the Cape Breton Exhibition, who canceled on May 5th. So what does this mean for the future of events and fairs in Canada? One of the things that I love most about my experiences working in the live event industry was providing a shared experience. Young and old, from all walks of life, everybody could come together and for one afternoon or evening, really lived a shared experience together. For me, that was the magic of events and fairs. I have my own wonderful memories, and I loved every moment of the opportunity to be behind the scenes, the stage manager, creating some of that magic for others. And so now we find ourselves in a unique time. A shared experience for me, I think of agricultural fairs and summer evenings, but now we all have a shared experience globally. More than ever, we have a great opportunity to build on this shared experience, just like we would one of the memories that I spoke about. Consumers currently have a bit of a sense of understanding They're willing to forgive little bumps in new endeavors. So this is the perfect time to try something new. As far as I can see, the pandemic is playing out primarily in the digital space. So we'll dive into some more statistics later, but one of the overwhelming numbers is one from Facebook, which as an organization, which includes both Facebook and Instagram, saw a 70% increase across all of its apps within the month of March alone. You can only imagine how that's increased over the month of April. These numbers are quite frankly staggering and unprecedented in the field. And so clearly a shift in digital marketing strategy is required. So this brings us to the topic of the evening, your best practice playbook. We're going to go through this in a stepwise manner. So the first step is know your audience. This is kind of the who of the situation when we look at the who, what, where, why. This is always a critical piece of any kind of marketing at any time, but it's most critical during times of crisis like this. Marketing as a whole, but particularly digital marketing, relies heavily on empathy, which in turn relies on the understanding of the people that you're trying to talk to. If you've been marketing your event for a while, or you're located in a fairly small community, you might be tempted to just skip over this step. You already know your customer, right? Maybe, but do you know them in their current state? Are there additional audience opportunities that you haven't assessed that now would be a great time to test out? It doesn't matter who you are on the scale of your event. Now is the time to take a step back and reacquaint yourself with your ideal customers. So let's take a few minutes to explore how you can do that. So we're going to be talking a little bit about personas. All of this will impact your digital marketing and your engagement plan and likely your overall marketing strategy. So first thing is you need to identify the basic information. So really simple things like age, gender, location, basic interests. These are the things you probably already know about your audience. Then find out what your customers are thinking and feeling now. So this involves doing some research, checking with influencers that are active in your customer space. Think about what you need to do to put yourself in your customer's shoes. Things that they might not have been dealing with before that they are now. Are they working from home? Are they trying to keep kids busy now that schools are closed? Are they trying to stay fit and healthy maybe while in quarantine? Or maybe just eating all the snacks? You have to take those answers then and take a step back. Zoom out, forget what you've done before and what you thought you knew about your customers. Are there new opportunities that you can use to share your event in different ways with different kinds of people? Can you pivot to meet different needs? This is a really basic framework of developing personas. At Halmyre, when we're working with our clients, we go through a long stepwise process of combing through data and sometimes interviewing customers to find common threads or patterns. To explain this a little bit more thoroughly, personas are fictitious representations of your event's customers or stakeholders and are developed through information gathered through user research. So they represent typical customer behavior patterns. They help to guide decision making and allow preliminary testing of how marketing will affect these types of members. They can provide helpful frameworks in making marketing and operational decisions and replace assumptions about what customers need and why with real feedback from your event's customers. So let's take a look at these two that I fictitiously developed for this audience. These are real names of personas that we do develop sometimes. We do assign an actual name. We think about what the person might say about your event and things like that. So Superfan Janet, she's a strong advocate for your event and a long-term attendee. She wants your event to continue and improve and evolve, but not too much. She likes the traditions and she really knows what to expect. I'm sure that all of you can identify with this. We even put quotes to what these types of personas might say. Oftentimes these come directly from interviews that we'll do. So on kind of a more micro level, you can scale this down a bit. And by using those 3 steps that I mentioned in the slide before this, start to develop a couple personas for your event. Now that we know the who, now we have to talk about the what. So this is step number 2. Adjust your messaging, but don't adjust your key strategic pillars. So I don't know if everybody remembers this as well as I do, but as soon as the pandemic hit, I started receiving emails from all kinds of organizations that I couldn't even remember buying a product from or subscribing to their mailing list. Quite frankly, hearing about the swift action taken by the CEO of a company that I registered a warranty for my lawn furniture last year really wasn't top of my reading priority list. As you can imagine, the organization sharing this news of his swift action earned a really swift unsubscribe from me to their emails. So while it's important to understand and ensure that your customers understand that you're working to develop safety standards and best practices, really now is not the time. We don't need to blast it out. If you're a leader and you fill the digital social space with positive messaging that's aligned to your event strategy, that's going to pay you back in spades. So let's think about what this means for fairs and events in Canada. 71% of those polled in the US and Canada believe that they'll need to steer clear of crowds and keep schools and businesses closed for at least 2 more months. That was as of May 1st. So we're talking at least until the end of June that it seems like the overwhelming majority of people seem to think that things need to be closed. 77% of consumers want you to talk about how your brand can help them and not about coronavirus. 46% of social media users say they're spending more time on social media. That figure, like we mentioned earlier, is astronomical. And 53.9% of organizations sent out a coronavirus-related email. I'm not sure what everybody did, but I hope that if you did it well. So let's chat about this graph. I really wanted to dive deep today into, are people kind of over events? And we can use digital metrics to understand a bit more about this. So let me acquaint you a bit with this graph. This depicts the pre and post-crisis means or averages on send volumes, which are the dotted lines and essentially the gray area. So all of this gray area in here and up here are the sends. This dotted line up here, the pre-crisis mean, and this dotted line down here is the post-crisis mean. For the post-crisis mean, the percentage change in volume is listed, which is 64% for the event industry. This is the highest of any industry that was studied. The start of the stock market crash is marked with the red line, and when the stay-at-home orders or the quarantine issues began to be issued by the government, this is marked with the blue line. So the inboxing rate, that's the measure of how many of those emails are sent to the inbox as opposed to the spam folder or bouncing. And that's marked with the green line and the open rate with the purple line. So what are the key insights that we can draw from this graph? The good news is recipients generally haven't written off events altogether by marking them as spam, or they don't hit their inbox and unsubscribe. But they just aren't interested in opening them right now. So we have to think about ways that we can engage them, which are not via email. The key to this is to focusing less on you and your event and more on them. So there will be a time and a place when you can talk about the measures that you're taking to ensure the safety of the public at your event. But right now, as a general rule, is not that time. Now is the time to expand your audience so that when the right time does strike to discuss your new safety protocols, you have the attention and the expanded interest of your audience. Right now, you want to be unifying communities, being a positive light amongst the clutter of the news cycle and constant pandemic updates. Take on the goal of being a community hub, a place where your customers and your audience can come to experience each other's stories and share together, just like you do at your own events. Don't be afraid to reach out, ask your community for what they need, or ask them to share their skills, expertise, and stories with you. By expanding your social reach now, you'll be setting yourself up for success when you're able to launch your next fair or exhibition down the road. So this brings us to step 3, kind of the proverbial how of what we're talking about. This is about exploring new ideas or uncharted waters. So if you haven't dipped your toe in the waters of the social media ocean, now is the time. If you've ever wanted to expand your strategy to Snapchat, now is the time to dig in and go for it. If you're not sure how to use Instagram stories, but you think it might resonate with your audience, do it now. If you're not looking for new channels, but you're curious to see how your audience would react to different kinds of content, more frequent posting, or other creative engagement methods, go for it. Now is the time to look for all ways that you can build relationships with your customers. So my general rule of thumb with social media videos is the more organic, the better. And really, this goes double for our current circumstances when everybody is at home. The dog's barking in the background, you don't have the perfect background aesthetic or superior video quality. It's really not tragic. Your audience will actually relate to you better as someone else dealing with the same circumstances they are. We're all at home with comfortable clothes and poor lighting, and it was not the time to sweat that. Listening is such an important part of the social dynamic, and it's really quite often overlooked. In order to be an active part of the conversation surrounding your event and to pick up some useful feedback along the way, you need to really understand what your customers are saying. As I mentioned, searching and using hashtags will make your listening so much easier. And by mentioned, I mean on the slide. Hashtags group content together. And that means that they can be used across all active social platforms. So when you're using the right ones and you're posting your content, that will really widen the audience that you're targeting and that has access to your content. Solicit content from your audience. It could be photos to feature that were taken at your event. That's a natural fit for this kind of industry. Or ask your audience to submit maybe their best one-liner to describe their experience at your event. Any asks of your audience will lead to growth in your engagement. To take it one step further, I put together a few simple tactics that you might want to use to execute in your newly defined strategy in your playbook. So here's just a few examples. So you could release some coloring pages featuring attractions or highlights or animals from your fair or exhibition. Brand them with your event's branding. This will not only entertain kids at home and keep parents happy, but by developing and releasing the coloring pages, you're engaging with your audience. You could even take that a step further. Ask parents to post photos of their kids' completed coloring projects to win passes to your event next year, or something along those lines to engage them. Go live on Instagram. I'm not sure if everybody is on Instagram or is familiar with it, but going live essentially means that you're putting a live face on a camera and allowing for real-time conversations. People can write in comments and questions, and the person who's on the live has access to view those and answer them in real time. You can go live with one person, or you can go live with multiple people on the same screen. So if you let your audience know a few days ahead of time that perhaps the CEO of your fair, or perhaps last year's donut eating contest winner, or what have you, will be answering their questions live on Instagram at a certain date and time. This will cause a couple of things. One, you can allow them to submit questions ahead of time, which will garner engagement leading up to the event and create a bit of social buzz. And then two, when the event itself actually hits, then you have some questions lined up for the person to answer and kind of have prepped in advance. And then they can also respond to questions that are submitted during the live. There's a lot of really great metrics that you can take from the live event, and just a word of caution that you have to get those within 24 hours of doing a live. So just keep that in mind if you're going to do that. Before we move on from this slide, I want to touch on that tip that I've listed at the top, which is plan your activities using a content calendar. A content calendar is really imperative for a good social media strategy and digital marketing as a whole. So this can be done through many social monitoring tools, or if your budget's tight, use an Excel spreadsheet. Content calendars are a grid, basically. They have the days of the week listed across the top, and your social platforms and digital marketing mediums listed in the left-hand column. So you would plan out your content for the week within that grid. So you may be posting the same types of content across different platforms on the same day. You may have themes for the day. You may have, every Monday you post something about Motivation Monday, or maybe it's Fair Friday, and you group it under that hashtag, and you start training your audience so they know what to expect from you and continue to come back to your platform week after week. If you have any questions about content calendars, I'm happy to connect with you following the presentation. I have a really great Excel spreadsheet, or I can also make some suggestions for social monitoring tools. To get back on track, here's some really great ways to consider engaging with your audience. So I'm going to dive a little deeper into a couple of social platforms themselves and the opportunities that are presented. With Twitter, you can add a poll right within your tweet. So again, I'm not sure how much of our audience is on Twitter, but these are really great ways to solicit audience feedback in real time in a really quick, engaging way. For Facebook, you have to download this poll app, and you can integrate that with your Facebook business page, and you can create polls on the page itself. Instagram. So Instagram is an extremely visual social medium, which in my opinion is an ideal platform for this kind of industry. Within Instagram, there's 3 options to solicit real-time engagement with polls via stories. So I took a little bit of extra time here in getting content to put forth for you because I think these are really important ways that you can engage with your audience. So this first one here on the left-hand side is a poll. So the way that you go about doing this is when you do your story, you have a little swipe up at the bottom. You can put the question in, and what the viewer sees would be that bottom part, the yes or no, or whatever you choose your answers to be. And as soon as they click on one, it'll show that screen above. So it'll show them what everybody else has chosen, which is a really great way to keep them engaged. And you can also share that out again afterwards. The Instagram story sliders. So that's basically an emotion slider. You can say, you know, on a scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel about this? Or in this example, how much do you love pizza? And for you, this is a really great opportunity as an event or fair to see individually what people are thinking. Maybe there's people that are an absolute 10 and an absolute 0, and there's not very many in the middle. That tells you something. Nobody can see those individual answers except you. And then you can always publish the average back to your story again. The last way that you can do this is with multiple choice. So you can make it so that people can select their own answer, and then you get that data. Or you can make it so there is a correct answer and it shows them when there's a correct choice, and little fireworks go off, and it's a good engagement piece. So not only can you post a kind of poll like this, but as I mentioned, with each of these options, viewers can actually see the average reaction or the result immediately after choosing their response. So this is a really great way to engage with people about your fair exhibition. You can ask them things like if they've ever attended before, to select maybe their favorite event, to see how they feel about maybe a certain food you might serve, those kinds of things. You can get really creative with these. Lastly, on Instagram is open-ended questions. So in my opinion, this is one of the best tools that Instagram has put out for the business world, because not only can you ask a question, you can see each person's individual response, and then you can choose to share those answers out on your story while remaining completely anonymous, and still answering those questions for all of your audience to see. So this is really the perfect opportunity to ask open-ended questions and drive audience engagement. Things like, what's your favorite ride? Or what do you miss most about the fair? What would you like to see at next year's event? You can ask everything from very high-level questions to deep dive questions. And as I mentioned, sharing out those responses gives you an opportunity to comment on the feedback. So you can see here the question is, I'm just waiting for the boss to ask me a question. And somebody says, oh, I love your haircut, what made you do it? And then this person got to comment on it. So from a business perspective, there's some real opportunity here to demonstrate to your audience that you're listening and that you want them to be a part of the conversation. So we're going to move on to the fourth touch point. We've already touched on this a little bit, but the way that I like to illustrate a two-way conversation on social media goes like this. So bear with me for a second if you can picture this. The social media ecosystem is the social scene of the digital space. So maybe it's like your favorite neighborhood restaurant or pub. People come in, they let loose, they're open to conversations from strangers, they drop their facades, they engage with personalities from all walks of life. This vast base of active users on social media is one of the biggest perks. And it's important that as an organization, you're on your A game when you're engaging with them. Users, if you think about the pub analogy, don't want a one-sided conversation where you're just talking at them across the table. But they might be open to having a conversation about the experience that you've had. In our case, the experience maybe that others have had at your event, or perhaps seeing some really great photos. Social media allows you to target a really dedicated niche audience, one that would be more willing to engage with your brand. So this brings us to the growth. We're going to talk a bit about driving growth in your social engagement. And for this, I wanted to share with you a short case study, which is very recent. We just wrapped it up. It took place throughout all of April 2020. We worked with OSPE, which is the Ontario Society of Professional Engineers, which not the same vertical, I know that, but the learnings and the insights that we developed from this are really applicable. So if you'll just, again, bear with me for a few minutes while I go through the data, I think that you'll find some really valuable takeaways. OSPE had 3 strategic pillars as a part of their corporate strategy. Engineers Care, Engineers Lead, and Engineers Unite. So we built a campaign that was aligned with their strategy by supporting these 3 pillars. So we started out by introducing the campaign and letting their audience across all social platforms know that every day we'd be posting a new piece of content that exemplified either engineers caring, engineers leading, or engineers uniting. We developed a unique suite of creative to accompany this. So we developed new branding for the Care, Lead, Unite, which gave it a really visual focused aspect. We asked the audience to submit stories of their own and share any content that they may find. We ended up sourcing a lot of our own content in the beginning, which is to be expected. We didn't have everybody on board yet. But as we began sharing stories from the engineering community in Ontario, in Canada, and then all over the world, people began sending us messages with suggestions. We ran an Instagram Live, like I spoke about earlier, with OSPE's CEO, where we asked for questions ahead of time and also allowed viewers to submit them as he spoke on the live. It was a great success. It positioned him as approachable and authentic, and answering users' questions right on the spot. There was a lot of students asking questions about, getting a successful career as an engineer. And that's something that people really need to see right now, is people being open and approachable. This effort developed OSPE's social platform and really positioned it as a community hub, which is really powerful and can certainly be replicated for your events. I'm going to show you a quick snapshot of the success that was achieved over 3 weeks. So this is the last 3 weeks of April. So you can see these numbers and these key insights. So we'll just run through the numbers super quickly. So Twitter, we saw a 26.4% increase in impressions, a significant increase, nearly 60% in engagement. You can read the numbers yourself, but I think one of the key facts to think about in this is that this all came from only a just over 3% increase in the actual numbers of posts. So we didn't really change how much content we were sending out. We changed what kind of content we were sending out. So this goes to show key insight number 1 on this slide. It's not how often you post, it's what you post. Visual content is king. Photos and videos perform much better than copy, which I think probably most people know. Now, this was a really interesting insight, was that different types of content perform better on different platforms. So I can expand on that a tiny bit. So what we learned is that anything to do with statistics, numbers, studies, journals, that kind of more scholarly content went over really well on Twitter, whereas Facebook, not so much, kind of hit a brick wall there. On Facebook, the content that went over really well was content like the retirement of one of the top engineers in Ontario, and that really personal content that people come to Facebook as a platform to find. So just keep that in mind as you're developing content for different platforms, that different types of content perform better in different mediums. Engaging with your community and soliciting content creates that two-way communication and secures continued engagement. This can be seen from the Instagram Live that we did. That certainly contributed to the over 600% increase in average daily reach, which is the number of users that were served content associated with the profile. So that was all completely unpaid and organic traffic, which is really wonderful to achieve with no budget. So this just leads into considering an Instagram Live. The real-time interaction with your community is absolutely invaluable, and long-term member loyalty really develops that personal relationship. So we're back to another poll. So let me get that going for you. I think you can see what I'm sharing right now, but that's okay. There we go. So how many of you are currently using a social scheduling or analytics or listening tool? We maybe should have added an option saying, I don't know what that is, but I didn't think about that at the time. Okay, we're almost there. Take a sip of water. Give it just a few more seconds here. Any stragglers? Okay. Okay, so I think that we've kind of got it narrowed down here. We have almost a 30-60 split. So it's great to see that a third of you are. And if the other 2/3, I'm going to do my best to convince you that you really should be using something. There's a lot of free tools out there. There's a lot of tools that are inexpensive. We personally, I can tell you at Halmyre, we use a certain tool, which if you want to contact me afterwards, I can tell you about, but I'm not going to give them free advertising. So it is not overly expensive, but it provides really great insights. So let me tell you a bit about why those insights are so important. Measure, measure, measure. Yeah.
Sorry, before you talk about the why, can you just talk about the what? What is it?
The what?
Yeah, so what is a social content?
Oh, yes. Sure. So hold on, let's go back to that slide. So a social scheduling analytics listening tool is essentially a tool that allows you to create your content and schedule it within it. So I talked about that content calendar earlier. It's essentially a digital platform that you log into and you have your own unique account and all of your social accounts are connected to it. And you can schedule all of your content within it. And then it also tracks and analyzes all of the metrics of your content as it goes out and on a historical basis. You can compare your competitors on most tools. You can listen to conversations that are happening in your space or about your industry. You can set up keywords or triggers. You have an inbox typically on the tool so that you can see all of the messages that are being sent to you and respond to them in a really timely manner. It's kind of a hub to marry all of your social accounts together and track them. Does that kind of give a bit of a overview? Good, okay. So measuring. This really goes back to the old saying of you can't manage what you don't measure. So for everybody out there doing any kind of social media, if you don't have a tool in place, then you cannot be measuring and benchmarking accurately. And that is undoubtedly the most important part of this playbook, is that you really need to measure and set benchmarks. So there's a couple ways that we can go about doing that. So I suggest that we refocus on strategy. So what that means is I'm not suggesting that you forget your strategy entirely. I'm suggesting that you let your strategic plans kind of sit in the driver's seat and focus your efforts with a bit of a new lens. So the middle of a global pandemic is probably not the best time to focus on the same year-over-year KPIs that you've always held dear to your organization. We shouldn't discard them altogether. They'll move back toward the top of your list eventually, but it's in your best interest to assess right now what success looks like versus what it looked like before. So I've listed a few examples here for you of what that might play out like. So for example, we'll just look at the last one quickly. If something, a contest, a video, a partnership, maybe a piece of content, a referral campaign, didn't provide the right ROI before, it was time to move on. Dead in the water, let's not put any more effort and energy into that. Now, it's time to double check your assumptions. A contest or a partnership may not have met your KPIs previously, but perhaps now they might. Now in this current climate, they actually might serve your event really well. So it's not to kind of throw out what you're doing before, but it's to kind of reframe and reassess what your current benchmarks and metrics might look like. So the tools that we can use to do that. There's 2 tools to keep top of list in your playbook. The first one is Google Analytics. And the second one, we'll talk about in a minute, is that social scheduling analytics and listening tool. So Google Analytics, it's free to use and too often treated as a free tool. Google Analytics, to use it properly, takes some serious skill and some serious time to hone your knowledge. There's 3 key steps to setting up your Google Analytics. The first is actually setting your account up properly. You need to be using Google Tag Manager to track your content, integrate it with a pixel from Facebook, and set up your events to track conversions accurately. The second step is to pull the data regularly from Google Analytics, knowing where to source it from and how to manipulate it. And the third step is that once you actually have that data, you need to then parse it and understand what it means. What actionable insights can you really gather from that data? All of this can take quite a while to learn, and most organizations are really only skimming the surface of what can be learned. And quite frankly, cards on the table, I am not a subject matter expert in Google Analytics, but I'm very lucky to have someone on our team who is. So if you have questions about Google Analytics, again, feel free to reach out to me. I will not answer them, but I will put you in touch with the person who is much more well-versed in Google Analytics than I am. A social media management suite. This is my wheelhouse. This is what I know well. So this is the tool that I mentioned earlier. These tools are really imperative in deriving value in implementing ongoing key learnings in your social media efforts. I don't know if you remember I think it was American Express slogan, don't leave home without it. But to me, the same thing applies to social media management. Don't put effort into your social without it. This is, for me, the digital equivalent of putting on a fair or an exhibition or another event and not talking to the attendees or listening to what they're saying when you're there. A social suite allows you to create a content calendar, which, like I mentioned before, provide advanced listening features to understand what your audience is talking about. It informs you of your top advocates and will give you insights into their networks. And it provides in-depth analytics that can quickly be converted into actionable insights to continuously improve your social media efforts, which results in much quicker success. So these are just a few quick screenshots from the social tool that I like to use. This one in the middle shows our top influencers in the space. So this shows how many people and who are talking about you and how many times within the past time frame. So I think this was a 30-day period. They've mentioned you in their conversation. The one on the right-hand side for me is probably the best. It talks about what other people are talking about when they mention you. So it's keywords, hashtags, phrases that most frequently appear in conversations. So these things are absolutely key to understanding your audience and to being able to engage with them and be a part of that conversation. So usually there are some really quick wins for every organization when we look at measuring a meaningful engagement. There's continuous improvements as to how you find and analyze that data. And as I mentioned, you don't need to spend a lot to get that. You can, like I said, spend nothing. There's some really great social suites out there that you can find that are free. Again, you kind of get what you pay for. But for me, if you're going to spend $1, spend it on metrics, spend it on tracking. There's no point promoting your content unless you can track it. So to kind of sum up, you really need to invest in your ability to measure and manage audience engagement, and that's what's going to help you grow your ability to engage. That kind of wraps up my 5 key points for a playbook. I did put together a few resources for you. So this page here, which I will give to Christina afterwards to share out. There's a few pieces of content on the Halmyre website that might be valuable for you. There's a white paper on marketing data intelligence and how to drive ROI, which touches on a lot of the things that we talked about in this presentation, and everything is absolutely free. And demystifying Google Analytics. That's a bit of a guidebook to Google Analytics, and was really my guiding light before I had my colleague to help me on Google Analytics. And I also included here a few of the references of where I got some of the statistics from in the presentation, so that you can take a look yourself and see if there's anything that's more applicable to you or your audience that can really frame things for you. So I'll let Christina go with some questions now.
Great, thank you so much. I think that was a fantastic presentation. I'm sitting there. I might have fun putting together personas for my social media platforms and putting pictures and things. So that's a really neat idea. I also have some questions selfishly, but I first will ask, Harry asked, and I know you said you didn't want to give them the advertising, but I think people are dying to know what social content platform do you use, or aggregator?
So I will tell you, but don't tell them I told you.
You should get a commission.
I should. It's called Sprout Social. I really personally like Sprout. I've used a lot in my time. But Sprout for me provides the most accurate, high quality information that is easy to see and pull those insights from. Like I said, some of those charts that I showed are directly from Sprout. So it's not like you have to parse through the data like you do almost with Google Analytics and a lot of the other suites. It visually shows you a lot of the trends and pulls out those keywords for you, so you don't have to go through that. Yeah, so you can get, just to circle on that for a second, you can get some packages through Sprout. I know that, not a pitch, but Halmyre does have an agreement with them that we have negotiated lower pricing. So happy to put anybody in touch with that if they'd like.
That's awesome. That's actually really awesome. I've heard a few other people recommend that. So it's validated. Not recommend, use the name. It's not a reference.
Name drop.
So Rachel asked, what kind of questions do you ask when interviewing your audience to develop their personas? And are the interviews in person, or do you send out a survey? How do you collect that information?
Right, so it depends what kind of a budget we're working with and what kind of a time frame we have. So it also depends on the geography of our audience. So for example, if we're looking at an audience that maybe spans, 3 provinces for a larger event, and you have the money, you might want to invest in sending out a survey. And then you can kind of choose the questions in that survey that would be most applicable. If you have a lower budget and you have kind of a more niche type audience, I have actually recently been doing a whole lot of Zoom interviews with people. So we can find people through a variety of means. You can find people through social media. You can find them through a pre-existing network. Depending on the type of organization, you may know who's kind of influential and a social media perhaps influencer in a certain space. And we usually go through and do a bit of a SWOT. So it's very old school, but we ask them to tell us a bit about what they think the strengths of the event would be, what the weaknesses are, what the opportunities are, what the threats are. And through pulling out that information, you have the opportunity to kind of dig deeper into some things that they might say, that kind of, you can latch onto those keys and start to pull out common threads through different interviews that you'll go through, to figure out what motivates them and what drives them to those behaviors, and to kind of feeling those different ways.
Great. And I think along that thread, I guess, you mentioned the term influencer, which I think might be a new term to some people. Can
Mm-hmm.
you explain a bit more about what that is and what it might look like in a smaller community as well?
Mm-hmm. So an influencer probably is a kind of new-ish term. It was definitely coined in the social media space, but I don't think it specifically applies to social media. So a social media influencer is somebody who's very influential in a certain topic or area. So there's micro influencers that influence a very specific niche. So for example, I've worked with a girl in Hamilton who has maybe 3,000 followers, but they're all very dedicated. They're all very Hamiltonian, Hamilton in Ontario, just outside of Toronto, for anybody who's joining us from not the GTA. And she has a great impact and influence over people's decisions in that area. So if she suggests a restaurant or an event, or I think she recently did like a mattress, then the bang for your buck in terms of partnering with an influencer to promote your event or service or product is significantly higher. And in fact, most major brands are actually investing their money in influencers rather than big marketing campaigns right now. So you can do your own research to find influencers in your space. You can, do a whole lot of Instagram hopping and Googling. Or there are agencies out there that now represent a lot of these influencers that can connect you with the appropriate influencers for the exact specs that you're looking for. But I like the organic way of doing it myself.
Fair enough. Well, and I think for our part too, there's some natural influencers in our industry. I think of a lot of people on this call will know Marla Calico. She's the International Association of Fairs and Exhibitions CEO, and everyone follows her and her news and all that sort of stuff. I also, Judy's on the call. Judy, I consider as an influencer. A lot of people follow her, and she talks a lot about what's going on in the fair world. So certainly it's a little bit different. There's the influencers that you want to get to market your cause, and then there's the champions too, right?
Absolutely. On the stakeholder side, kind of, and on the, the micro influencer, local boots on the ground side. So there's certainly both. Yeah.
I also was wondering, what are some of the rookie mistakes people make with social media? If you can name one or two that you think of.
So the first mistake that we see with a lot of accounts is one-sided conversations. So as I kind of alluded to in that analogy about sitting at a pub, a lot of brands or businesses or events or organizations can tend to talk a lot about themselves. People don't necessarily want to follow along for a one-sided conversation where they're just kind of getting pushed information about your brand. Retweeting or reposting other people's content, engaging with your audience, doing interesting posts and content that aren't necessarily super closely tied to your event or organization as a whole really draws people in, because nobody wants to be kind of shoved information, even in a creative way. They want to have engaging content that's really valuable.
Awesome. Someone asked as well, do you compensate influencers for this type of study when you're interviewing them about their feedback? How does that usually work?
So when we're doing the study for the personas, no. Most people generally will just want to chat with us. I mean, we ask for about a half an hour of their time. And if they're interested in the cause, we don't necessarily compensate them. The one time that I would say there's compensation involved is when we're doing a larger survey. There may or may not be compensation through the company who puts out the survey for us.
And you talked about I really like that case study where you had the example of the 3.1% increase in posts, but the engagement was through the roof. But I may have missed this point, but how often do you repeat content? So the same post to get engagement?
So, sorry, repeating content, do you mean like the same content on different platforms? Or do you mean the same message, but with kind of a different style of copy or way of presenting it across the same platform?
Yeah, I would say the same message on the same platform.
Okay. So typically, I mean, it depends what you're talking about. If you're leading up to an event, you're obviously going to want to be talking about that within the weeks leading up to it. As a rule, I try to say once every 4 days is enough. There's a concept that our president, Christine, likes to talk about, and it's 2x4 marketing. So it's you hit them over the head with a 2x4 with your message, and they fall down. And then when they try to get back up again, you hit them again with your message. Until they stand back up and they're just repeating the message back to you. So certainly there is something to be said for that. As Canadians, we all know the message of wash your hands. I think that's been told to us, 500 times. That's a prime example of 2x4 marketing. It's just drill it in, drill it in, drill it in. So there is something to be said for that. I think in social, when people have the option to unsubscribe at free will, you have to be a little more tactful. But there is definitely something to be said for just repeating your message. But as a rule, I try to do at least every 4 days. That's a break.
And I like that. I know it really depends on the circumstances, but even that guideline of every 4 days is a good starting point to work with. Margaret asked, what are the liabilities around reposting content?
So, I mean, generally, again, there is no issue with reposting content. Social media platforms are a free open space, and you can repost people's content as often as you like, as long as you are not claiming that it is your own. So for example, I'm retweeting something or reposting it, or even taking a link from somewhere and saying, hey, I found this great link, or if you're interested in this, check out this link. And then just giving the credit, giving like a little byline as you would an article, which you could use their social media handle, which is their name, just to make sure that the credit where credit's due. But really, there's no liability with reposting content as long as you're not claiming it's your own.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, and I know there's meme wars that go on out there. Well, I posted this first, and that account's taking credit for it, and all that sort of stuff.
I try to stay away from the memes. I think it's a dark spiral.
Yeah, fair enough. We're better than that.
Yeah.
I think the last question, unless some pop up here, which I think I've collected them all. The last question I have for you is, for those of us who are just starting to delve into the social media world, and we're playing with things because there's more forgiveness, what platforms do you recommend we look into? What social media sites, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, platforms would also be good.
Okay, cool.
You're right. So because in my mind, and this may be different for you, but the industry that we're talking about here, that fairs, exhibitions, events, has a lot of really great visual content. So in my mind, Instagram would be a really natural fit. Instagram also has some really advanced engagement tools. Like I mentioned in Instagram stories. It can be a little bit harder to grow your presence on Instagram because there aren't as many opportunities for cross promotion and reposting of content like there are on Twitter. So my two suggestions, well, three if I'm allowed to have three, but would be Instagram for the visual content, Twitter for those really quick interactions that you can have. Twitter is an amazing spot to find really tight-knit niche communities. The other really great thing about Twitter is that you have access to everybody. So on Instagram, people have private accounts and things like that. Twitter's Twitter. Your account, generally you have access to everyone. You have access to celebrities, you have access to influencers. And I mean, not that all those things are necessarily applicable, but it's a really great spot to start that conversation. And it's a really easy way for the conversation to evolve. And then Facebook, because I think that for a lot of events, Facebook has the tools to create an event that people can respond as going to from your business page. So I think that it's kind of important that you utilize the different pieces of functionality between all three to kind of create a complete and engaging social Rolodex for yourself.
Rolodex, who uses that term anymore?
Showing my age.
No, that's perfectly fine. That's great. Once again, thank you so much, Vanessa. This was a really great presentation, and I think people learned a lot. I'm sure some people, sorry, my dog's in the background. I don't know if you guys hear that. I'm sure some people will be reaching out for more information too. So stay tuned for that. We're just getting to the bottom of the hour, so we're going to wrap up here. I would say, guys, we're going to send out a survey tomorrow to see what you guys thought and let you know about some upcoming webinars. Next week, we're taking a break, but the week after that, we have Quality Video 101, video you can do with your iPhone or your smartphone. And we're also going to have a session after that called Government, How to Engage with the Government and those sorts of stakeholders, which is really key right now. And we'll be announcing a few others over the coming weeks, so stay tuned for those. The recording will be available online as well. And so thank you all for joining us tonight. And thank you once again, Vanessa.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
You too.